Welcome to Mississippi History from a Christian Perspective. I'm your host, Tracy Robinson. While President Lincoln had wanted the South's restoration to the Union to be as smooth as possible, Lincoln began Reconstruction by allowing any Southern state to set up a new state government. This allowance required that 10% of the voters registered in 1860 took a loyalty oath to the U.S. Constitution. These new state governments were required to abolish slavery. Following President Lincoln's assassination in April of 1865, Andrew Johnson of Tennessee became president. Johnson's plan for Reconstruction was very similar to Lincoln's. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified in 1865. This amendment completed the process of freeing all slaves for any territory under the jurisdiction of the United States. By December of 1865, most of the former Confederate states, including Mississippi, had met Johnson's criteria for Reconstruction. President Johnson appointed W.L. Sharkey, a non-secessionist, as the provisional governor of Mississippi. The first Mississippi Constitutional Convention under President Johnson's plan was held in Jackson on August the 14th of 1868. The convention abolished slavery and repudiated secession. Although some civil rights were given to black freedmen, voting privileges were not extended. Brigadier General B.G. Humphreys, formerly of the Confederate Army, was elected as governor. W.L. Sharkey and James L. Alcorn were elected as U.S. Senators. The newly elected Southern representatives reported to Washington, D.C., and waited to be seated in Congress. Radical Republican Thaddeus Stevens led Congress. He arranged to omit the names of the Southern representatives from the House roll. By refusing to seat the Southern delegates, Congress had taken control of Reconstruction and sought to undermine presidential authority by beginning impeachment proceedings against President Andrew Johnson. These events led to the end of any presidential reconstruction and began the period of congressional reconstruction. The post-war Mississippi legislature established a group of laws known as the Black Codes. These codes were designed to deal with the problems arising from displaced freedmen. Although emancipated, former black slaves faced many difficult situations for which they were completely unprepared. Most had no property, no education, and no marketable skills. They had no way to make a living and no place to live. Some continued to work for former masters. Some freedmen left Mississippi searching for a better life in larger cities and towns of the North, and some simply wandered around the countryside. The Black Codes demanded that every black person under the age of 18 must be apprenticed to a white person. Any black person not employed after January of 1866 was to be jailed as a vagrant, and employment was to be provided by the sheriff. Even though the northern states had similar laws against vagrancy, the radical Republicans used this as an example of Southern intractability. Congress, led by the radical Republican Thaddeus Stevens, moved to pass the Reconstruction Acts. These acts were based on the theory that the southern states were not a part of the Union, but were conquered provinces. As part of the Reconstruction Acts passed by Congress in 1867, all former Confederate states except Tennessee were put under military rule. Mississippi was part of the 4th Military District. Governor Humphreys was removed from office, and General Adelbert Ames was given the position of provisional governor. In order to remove military rule, each state would have to ratify the 14th Amendment and adopt a new state constitution. The new constitution had to be approved by both the voters within the state and the U.S. Congress. People within the state quickly realized that the government could not solve all the pressing problems of rebuilding the Magnolia State. Southern churches made fresh commitments to evangelism. Methodist churches established a Freedmen's Aid Society in order to educate former slaves. Southern Methodists were concerned about the education of women and established several female institutes as well. There was a strong conviction among post-war Christians that education must include religious instruction. For some time after the ratification of the new state constitution, Republicans took the lead in the Mississippi state government. The majority of the state legislatures were Republicans, and they held most of the local offices as well. During this time, the legislature repealed the black codes and other laws that limited the rights of blacks. Taxes were raised in order to rebuild the state and open up a new school system. In our next lesson, we'll discuss civil rights and segregation in Mississippi.